welcome everyone to the afternoon session of, well, if you're on the East Coast, the afternoon session, the morning session on the West Coast. We're here with Chris Barbour with writing a crime drama series. He's going to introduce himself, give you a little backstory where he is now, and there's a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or type something in the chat box, and we can get to your questions and have a nice conversation with Chris. And let's get started. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much. Good morning and good afternoon. I am currently working on, I'm a writer and executive producer of Criminal Minds Evolution. And I have been writing, as I like to say, plotting murder for over 20 years now. Not exactly how I planned to start out, because my break was actually writing an adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with a writing partner friend of mine years ago that got me my break in the business. But then we got a job working on Crossing Jordan in the early aughts, and I really enjoyed the work in the writers' room, the camaraderie of the writers' room, and the mystery writing, because I had been a fan of Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie growing up. And sort of from there, we had a party of the ways, my writing partner and I continued on in television and worked on a show a Canadian show called 1-800-Missing that became Missing, and then eventually spent a long time on CSI, Crime Scene Investigation, which was the original Recipe from Vegas, and then went on to Criminal Minds Beyond Borders. And so I like to say that if you want me to read your script, I would, but if you don't have a dead body at the beginning of it, I'm not sure I can help you move forward. I don't know. It is in some ways one of the easier forms genres to write, because there are clear stakes involved, and obviously a dramatic engine that seems like we must find justice, we must find the killer. So in that way, it seems very easy. In other ways, seems hard, because there are so many of them, and the audience has seen so much. So how do we surprise and entertain? And I'm certainly in that mode. I'm someone that I'd say I'm more of a someone that definitely wants to entertain you by the puzzle of the adventure of figuring out who did this.
Sounds good. So there's, obviously there's something that happens in each episode that needs to be wrapped up by the episode, or maybe it will carry on for a few episodes. But then there's the interactions between the stars that you need to kind of flesh out for the whole season, and even
there are. I would say that on, and the Law and Orders are a good example of this, that there's a sort of density of the impact of personal revelations on because there's, whether they call them procedural dramas that are episodic and they're standalones essentially. So you usually glimpse the murder mystery of the week will have you glimpse into the personal lives of these characters, and so you want them to change only ever so slightly. My very cynical thing would to say, just in terms of television, if you have a concept for a TV show, a crime drama, that will get you to 500 episodes. If you're basing it totally on a character, that'll get you to 50 or 60, because there's a natural evolution. Like in a feature, I remember years ago, there was a writer who told me that if you know the end of your story, you have a movie. And if you don't have an end of your story, you have a TV show. So basically a series is sort of a long, infinite act 2, where you don't really want that character to change, because you like the enjoyment of coming to, Poirot or Sherlock Holmes or any investigators, sort of to see them do their shtick each week or each episode. And it's really more of like fish out of water. Here, we're continuing to challenge our expert investigators with a puzzle that surely they can't solve this week. And then in a show like Criminal Minds, there are slow evolutions of how the characters develop over many years, relationships that come in and out of, but it's not as important to the dramas that I've done mainly on network television than, let's say, True Detective, which is a limited series that wants you to show you that the murder mystery is really an excuse to explore the investigator, him or herself. So those are sort of two different kinds of investigations.
Okay, Carla, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, hi, Chris,
Hi.
thank you so much for your time. I love crime dramas, and I know like definitely like something like How to Get Away with Murder would fit, right? But I'm curious about shows like The Wire or Snowfall or Top Boy. Like what genre would they fit?
I think I think I feel like I'm writing in terms of crime drama that there's the murder mystery or justice being solved. There's sort of the diving into the world of criminal activity that might even be, you might consider The Godfather in this realm, where the dynamics. I mean, I would argue that they're actually soap operas within the world of crime, which obviously heightens the stakes of our interpersonal relationship. So, you might have some kind of family drama, but obviously if we're all going to die because we're not getting the cocaine somewhere, or we're not getting the guns somewhere. So it's probably an exploration of criminal, or it's usually a family drama or a pseudo family dynamic under the pressure of we are all working. We have the external pressure of people that want to put us in jail. So I would say that is a crime drama. And then I'm more in the murder mystery, Law and Order kind of, not the show Law and Order, but there is a person murdered and we are going to find justice for this person. And in my case, it's literally a serial killer every episode, which is not true, thank God, in real life. And I sort of like the more highfalutin, Hannibal Lecter is not real. The idea, though, in terms of writing, is to make him feel real. And that this creature could exist in our universe. And the Wire, in particular, I think is really attempts to be very accurate. Although, again, I would argue all of it's make believe. So you exist. The trick in writing is that it seems we're having a conversation that we can write scenes that seem real, but it's all dramatically structured. So it's more. Everything is a choice by the people who put it together creatively. And so we just are trying to render it in a way that the audience believes like it's almost a documentary. So it helps with the dream.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now, so let's take a step back and how would you be able to market yourself as a crime drama writer? What's a good way to break into being able to get in the room?
Well, cynically and sadly, one of the reasons, be in law enforcement. I mean, that's I'm not that. So but a lot of times what nowadays it's if you have a background in that. But really, I guess, beyond saying I have this personal experience of some kind of crime drama, I think it would be. I think it's always important to as a writer, in terms of marketing yourself, that I was once told by an agent, why would I go to the buffet when will go to the restaurant that specializes in the dish that I like? So I made a mistake early in my career that we did The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe family drama, but I really did want to write murder mysteries. So you are a brand. So why would I hire you as opposed to anyone else? So that, having a lot of samples that are these crime things. If you write a play, or if you write other pieces of material, whether they be books, or magazine or short stories, that they all are of a piece, so that I know that you are, that's what your skill set is, and usually what are you bringing to the table? Is it that you bring unique characters to the table? You have an interesting take on the metaphor of crime, those kinds of things, so that I know that if I'm hiring you as opposed to anyone else. I think we all know what a Shonda Rhimes show might be, or an Aaron Sorkin show. So that's ideal, is that if part of it is that you probably all looked me up before you came on. I have not distinguished myself as someone I bring something to the table, or I would say Martin Scorsese with The Killers of the Flower Moon. You kind of have an expectation of what that movie is. So there's always that balance of you want to see what Scorsese does in that environment, and there's violence, and so it's always trying to meet your expectation, but then also surpass it in some way. And as a writer, you should present yourself in some way where I'm like, oh, I kind of am interested in your take on this material, if that makes sense.
So you could be writing like an original pilot to, like, you know, get the people so you can prove that you have, you know, an idea of how a series works and then
Yes.
from there you can wind up, I mean, you might be looking for a writer who has a unique view of like a certain, you know, whatever there was in their pilot that kind of struck a chord with you.
Absolutely.
And I would imagine you get stories from the newspaper, or do you actually look for crime?
It's so interesting because, you know, on criminal on CSI, I mean, everybody was, whenever I was on CSI, like, wow, that would make a great CSI, because there was always some weird thing that was the evidence that turned things. I think you're inspired by true stories and you try to adapt them to some degree. That's a little less true in Criminal Minds, because again, you know, thank God there aren't actually that many people. But obviously, like if you talk about the Long Island guy that they just found, you're like, oh, that would be interesting to explore that world. Yeah, you generally do a lot of research in terms of, you know, law enforcement or past cases, and then try to adapt them to whatever the metaphor what are you trying to explore in terms of family dynamics. I say that usually the murder mystery is a metaphor, that it is the person gets killed, and it's an exploration of the secrets and lies surrounding that group of people. The shows that I work on tend to be that the main cast may not change very much, and the exploration of character is really the world you enter. So each episode is a new world. It's sci-fi shows and crime and murder mystery dramas, procedural dramas work similarly, in that you take your team of people who that the audience, it's a cipher for the audience, and we now dive into this world that may not be familiar to the audience. So it's, you know, like you could make a murder mystery in the world of the NFL, and you're like, or the world of rock music, you know, or the world of international travel.
Okay, can you give us like an example of like an idea that you had that started out as a seed and became an actual episode? Like,
I was watching the show Hoarders many moons ago, and was just fascinated with hoarding as a psychological issue. And then I read a book about it, and I thought, oh, that would be interesting to do an episode of CSI at the time, where the crimes, and we also, practically speaking, and I can't get away from this because everything I do now is within the lens of like, how are we going to make this, not just what are the great ideas. So we had to do what is called a bottle episode, which means we can only we only have one place that we can be for budgetary reasons. So I thought, oh, we could be in a hoarder house, and that the person actually, police begin to find bodies buried in the junk inside the house. And it worked very well, so that eventually there's a woman who lives in the house, and you think that she's killing these young men, and then we find her daughter chained up in the house. And the twist is that the daughter who's chained up is actually the one who killed the people, spoiler alert, who killed the young men who are buried in the junk in the house. But she has family there who are trying to protect her, because they think that someone is trying to frame her, because they're taking advantage of this poor woman who has a mental illness. So that was sort of the thing that I thought was one of my better episodes of the CSI episode, of the CSIs that I've done.
Yeah, I mean, the fact it was a bottle episode, I'm sure was huge. They're usually not the best episodes.
Exactly.
So I know there's so many like new like true crime podcasts now.
Yes.
And is that a place that you go, or you avoid stuff like that? Are there ways to take true crime podcasts and turn them into stories?
I think what's interesting is also to distinguish between what is trying to find the right words. Like, there are things that you read about that are dramatic and fascinating. I know, like, but they're not drama, because drama is actually between two people, and it's sort of a change through conflict. So a lot of times, there are tons of people who've been tried for years and years and years to do forensic accounting as a way to solve crimes. But at the end of the day, It's not, it's like, that means your investigator is on a computer, is going through paper. I mean, like, that's not a sequence of scenes or things like that. So there's a lot of things on true crime podcasts that in the essence of the crime is something that you actually do want to, dare I say, steal, but you're trying to find out what is the motivating the person who's committing the crime. What do they want? What need is fulfilled by all of this? What are the investigators? How are scenes going to play out that will solve not just solve the crime, but sort of explore what it needs to change about a person. So oftentimes there are, again, there are only two reasons people get killed in the world: profit or passion. Sometimes it's the same. And it is the details. So sometimes you can steal very, very interesting details of how people tried to cover up the crime. And then you're trying to explore, why did they do that? I see a question there.
Yeah, Enrico, did you want to pop on and ask a question?
Yeah. No, it was just it was just a comment. That's all.
Oh.
It was just a comment. Sorry.
Oh,
Just a general comment. Ben Affleck had that action. Didn't he have an accountant movie where he tried to make it?
Yeah, but he's also then you're fighting,
Yeah. He's like an action hero accountant.
Exactly. So you end up being that way. If you do a show about a coroner, you start the story, and then obviously the coroner has a body and they find something, but at the end of the day, it's a skill set that requires your coroner is going to need more than just be able to cut up bodies, because it's like, that, and it's Bones is a good example of that. Like, not every episode of Bones has her have to find the bones, and that's the part where not CSIs don't interrogate witnesses. You have to evolve the show into a sort of heightened reality where it seems real, but it's not. And that's sometimes hard for people because they get lost in the weeds of what's real and what's not real, because they also perceive that everything they've seen on television is how it works, and it really isn't. A lot of crimes go unsolved, for instance. It's like a 45% solve rate in generally speaking. So everybody's not as good as TV makes it out to be.
So
I have a quick question, if it's
okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
sorry. My question again, sorry. So as far as writing a series and writing a feature, just curious, Chris, have you also written crime features, and what would the shift be? I'm a big Hitchcock fan.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just be curious, have you ever done feature films, and is it a big shift from writing a television series versus a feature? That's a crime. Murder.
I think that I have not written a feature crime show. I've only, and I guess it would be that the feature would be more centered on, I mean, they're not too different in some regards, in the sense that I think that the feature would be more about sort of the simple version is damaged detective, damaged investigator type, who then has to sort of evolve and find their better self through the exploration of solving this crime. In TV, at least in the TV and then you see that on a true detective kind of show. On the shows that are CSI, these are accomplished people. It's more like a Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is damaged to an extent, but for the most part, it's like he has a certain number of tricks that the audience will want to see. So it's kind of like going to a concert, and you just hope that the performer performs the songs that you'd like to hear, and a couple of new ones, but you really do want the hits. So you want him to see, you want him to do the elementary, My Dear Watson. So I'm more on those shows where you establish a set of skills, and then you challenge the investigator. I think Kiss the Girls is probably more in line with the kind of feature that I would. Alex Cross, as an investigator, has a skill set, and now it's about challenging Cross's skill set with a crime against an adversary that is the evil image of himself. So it's sort of that exploration of character that on a weekly show you're not getting into. On a weekly show, I'm coming as the investigator to help people who need help. So there's a selflessness about that. It's also harder to do sort of personal beats in a crime drama as opposed to a medical drama, because in a medical drama, we can all have our narcissistic, romantic, love problems, and then the bus crash comes in and we all are selflessly helping to save the kids. In a crime drama, if you stop to like take each other's emotional temperature, like, why are we not talking anymore? It's like, there's a killer out there killing and you're wasting time. So you can write it. And I can tell you that you write it a lot. There's a lot in a lot of shows and TV where you write a bunch of stuff that you end up cutting in the editing room, because you lose a sense of urgency. And again, there's a killer on the loose. So anytime your hero stops down to do something for themselves, the audience just feels like, what are you doing? Because I'm cutting to the bad guy and he's going to kill somebody. So it's interesting, like you can read it, because obviously the pace as you read and you're in your own imagination, you can slow it down. But when you're actually sitting and experiencing it, it just is you just get it out of there. You cut it out. I think a lot of people think, and like, to me, as I say, like, I can't get away from how's it going to look when it's finally put together? Because there is absolutely the script you sell that will not be the script you see. I think there's a lot of talk of writing where, like, what you saw in the movie theater was the script, and it's no, like, that's a version, that is the, God knows what version of that script. You need to, write a script that people are intrigued by, and then they put it in production, then they make some edits because of the money, and then they shoot it and they look at it and go, oh my God, I can't believe we're going to show people this. And then they edit it and rewrite it, and then that's what you see. And that's every day in TV.
Well, I'm fascinated by the whole writer's room process. And so, I mean, if you can talk about, either the hoarder's idea, or like how, when an idea comes in and everyone sits down, how does it go from, in the writing process, how does it go from that germ of an idea to the whole script and the whole story?
The process is interesting. I joke about, like, conspiracy theories. It's like, if conspiracy theories had to go through a writer's room, they just get shot down, because, like, people be like, I don't get that. I mean, like, but why would he do that? There is, sort of the logic police. And I do think each writer has their own thing about logic that they just can't get over. I like to say, you can be the person on YouTube who does the 10-minute video of everything that Chris Nolan did wrong in The Dark Knight, or you could be Chris Nolan. So there's a certain degree of, like, the room is a good editor. So that's the process. I would come in and pitch an overall big arc story. And then we have to lay down, like, what the room is about, like, laying down the scenes. What is the first scene? Where do we go from here? And the room, especially, I think crime dramas or procedural dramas are the best for a diverse group of people to be in, because you need that to keep yourself honest, dramatically, grounded in some sort of mystery. And some people, like, know, I know who the killer is by the end of Act 1. I mean, like, you've just given it away. Like, they can, it's almost like a jury. Like, if we can all get past, if all of us sort of agree that this is working, it's probably going to work for the audience. So that's the part in terms of, like, especially, like, it's never the first guy, as we say. Like, Act 1, we write in acts for commercial breaks, but also I write in acts anyway, just to know that every 8 minutes or so there's something, a big turn in the story. Having different voices look at it, where I'm trying to say, what if we did this? That person says, no, I know who the killer is. Like, because I do work on shows where by the end, the audience is playing along at home, and you hope that there's a sense of, like, I think it's the butler, or I think it's this guy, I think it's that guy. And then you maybe pick somebody that not everybody, it makes sense that it's the person, but not everyone saw coming. That's the gold standard. You don't always reach that. And the room is very good at helping you create a better mystery that's kind of like, I'm always leaning in. So I hope that sort of answers that, but it is everyone brings their own life experience and their own story experience, and that helps to shape a better mystery.
And how do you feel about those shows that actually show you the murder first, and you know who does it, and you like Poker Face or something like?
I love it. I most people, you have to be a much better writer. Because Columbo, I'm a huge fan of Columbo. I mean, like that's the whole, and it sets up sort of someone mentioned Hitchcock, that tension of like, we the audience know that's the guy, and he's gonna get away with it. And there are, like, crime shows each have their own. I used to joke that you could once take one story and put on, there was a time you could put one story on CBS and run it through the interpretation of NCIS, CSI without a trace, numbers. It could be the same murder taken through different interpretations. If you have, in terms of like knowing the crime or knowing the mechanics of the crime, it's harder to entertain or engage the audience because they're already way ahead, which is everybody's fear. On Criminal Minds, we don't like to show you the killer because the audience, until we've done the profile of the killer, because then the audience would be too far ahead. But it is true that if you're a very clever writer, it's not about who done it, it's about how. And that's often harder to write, to engage the audience. It's like, let's go, like, get that guy. Like, so I admire that a lot because I'm not sure that I could write as a compelling drama in that regard. The how am I going to get the bad guy? And you need to have a tit for tat, like why can't I get him? So.
No, it's interesting that you can't just deconstruct it and tell it in a different way because it's not the same writing skill, I guess.
Yes.
Too.
It's a totally different kind of story engagement than we're putting the puzzle pieces together, and by the end we'll figure out who it is. So I very much admire, and I do like those shows. I do Poker Face and Columbo. So. Yep.
Enrico, you have a question?
Yes. I was in South Korea, and CSI was like a popular show. I was really shocked by that because I thought some things would be lost in translation, like of a procedural, because their society would have a different organization of justice. So my question is, it's interesting that people would like it, even though they're divorced from the experience of having like that American style justice system. So how much do you worry about realism when you're writing something like that?
Very little.
You're talking about that, people poking holes on it, and I've seen that people they're like logic police, like you said. So is that a concern when you write a story? Like how grounded in reality does something need to be, like, to where you don't stretch the plausible deniability or the plausible, like, willing suspension of disbelief, where you don't stretch it too far?
I mean, you'll never know exactly, because again, it's I think you'll never get a third of the audience anyway. And as I say, I don't like country music, but it's a gigantic industry. So knowing your audience and sort of knowing what they might like in this particular genre. I do think that with CSI so the big concept of CSI is science solves crimes. So that I think is what across the world, because it was a #1 show around the world. The idea that there is this indisputable piece of evidence that I can find hidden somewhere in the room. There's a fingerprint in the air, and there's a technology that requires that. And there are these people that are skilled enough to pull that fingerprint out of the sky. I think is intriguing to people, because it's like all arguments are settled by, this is the evidence, this is the DNA. It's indisputable. So there's something about that idea that there is they called it Locard's principle, that when you commit a crime, you will always leave a part of yourself behind. You will take part of the crime scene away, and you will leave some of yourself behind. And that was every episode. And so the notion that it was harder and harder to figure out, how do we get that piece of evidence? I think that's what they're responding to. Now, that's not really true. In reality, there's not that one piece of evidence. So there is a fantasy fulfillment. And I do think that, at the end of the day, that's what these shows are. They're not documentaries. they are meant to be, you know, and I respect all criticisms of the show. For me, like Criminal Minds is more like, it's the nightmare. It's like a horror movie. And we're trying to scare you, and it's not trying to reflect. I mean, people can interpret it that way, and that's, you know, I totally respect that interpretation, but I also feel like I don't. Like, this is make believe. I'm like, one of the big genres in Germany is like, I guess on TV there were like 500 homicides on television in Germany 2 years ago, and like in reality they're like, you know, 50. Like, so they love them, like they're that perception of like there's all this violence on television, but in reality of their society there actually isn't a lot of violence. I think that's also probably true in Korea, that there's just not that much violence, but they do have this horror. I mean, they create these incredible horror movies, and I think it is like to poke around in your nightmares. So I personally don't worry about what is real, because, like, you know, Fourth Amendment, you know, we have a constitution, and there's all sorts of, you know, on TV, for a good example is there was a spree killer, and he went into a motorcycle shop and he shot up some people. He killed 2 people and he left, and he was killing people in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This was like 15 years ago. The police believed that the suspect was a person who had done business with the motorcycle shop. But in order to go through the receipts, which were literally in the cash register at the time, they needed a warrant from a judge. You don't, you know, drama is life with the boring parts taken out. No one's going to wait. And this is why this guy was able to kill more people. Is like, in reality, they had to wait, wake up a judge, get him to sign a warrant. Then they opened the cash register, and lo and behold, they knew where to go. So that would be just infuriating to an audience in terms of just their dramatic experience of it. Unless the purpose of your drama was to show just the naked, dirty, unruly aspects of our justice system, which I think there is that show. It's just that, you know, if you're doing CSI, that's no one cares about that. Let's just open the cash register and get the name and so, but you know, those are choices that you, as the creator of your drama, you're trying to entertain or you're trying to inform. So to me, it depends on your intention.
Okay, and then before a season starts, like what is that process like when you're kind of plotting out a whole season? Is there like a big meeting that has a bunch of episodes thought about, but not exactly what order you want to put them in?
Absolutely. I'm reminded of, I was told in the 90s ER the showrunner, the show is so successful that they started to fly to Hawaii to hang out, and what they called blue sky, which is we get together, the writers' room, we get together, and like what do we think, evaluating what we think the audience likes, what do we like, pitching stories, and you put up on a board, on a wall, like, different, if it's Criminal Minds, different criminal scenarios. Sometimes because now, especially because we're now more serialized, we also and we are doing more character beats. Part of that is like, what if we had Joe Mantegna's character David Rossi, maybe he gets a girlfriend, or maybe he, something happens, or he mentors someone. So absolutely, you get together and you throw up a bunch of story ideas, and then you sort of plot out, and as you say, like what order too, because it's a little bit like putting together an album, like what rhythm, because we, especially with our show, because there are these standalone shows, what do we want to do in what order to give the sense of a journey through the season. And our showrunner, her name is Erica Messer, is the arbiter of, we're trying to sell, like like you're working on SNL and trying to sell skits. We're trying to sell, like, why do we want to do this story? And sometimes, because, and can we, is there something in the news that we want to comment on and use the crime story as a metaphor? And then we whittle it, and then she sort of arbitrates the, you know, what whittling down in the order, and that's how we'll begin.
Then if somebody comes up with the idea, are they the person that gets the credit on the episode, or is it?
Yes. You know, yes. And in terms of a writer's room, this is a part that's I like very much. You know, and it can be hard. The unwritten rule is that when we're in the writer's room, the ideas, and I would only really want to work with people like this. So like, you can't hoard your ideas. You know, the show, you'd like to be like, oh, the show, you know, you're giving everything to the show. Generally speaking, if you know, if this is an idea that you're very passionate about, you're going to be the one to write it. But in terms of like with CSI, a lot of times the things that people might want to hoard is like a good piece of science to solve a mystery. Like, oh, I learned that there's this machine that does this, or this technique to do that. But when I worked at CSI, people were very generous about, you have a story, and you know what would be really good? That thing I read about would be great to help you in Act 4 solve the mystery. And you don't get credit for that. Like, you're still, it's sort of like when you write music, like when you add musicians come in to sort of help orchestrate it, they don't get credit on the writing of the song. It's still always going to be sort of if you're the, like with the hoarders, like overall, that's you know, would become my episode. And that hopefully it all evens out, that everybody sort of helps each other. But you do sort of pitch what you'd like to write as your episode. And then there are other ideas that you kind of give to the room to use as they might, you know, as they will. And then sometimes you want to team up people, like your idea and my idea actually kind of go together. So we sometimes we'll team up, just straight up team up, because we can do that.
Sounds good. Dee Dee, how are you today? You have a question?
Hey, Andy. Yes. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Yeah, so my question kind of goes on with creating a season, right? So you're talking about the fact that each of these episodes a lot of times is kind of like going into this, maybe this new world or this slice of life for this particular person, that there's like a format that's already, you know, expected. If you are the creator of a show, I guess this is like a two-part question. How do you, and maybe sometimes this means you are the showrunner, but how do you help continue to guide, I guess, a story that you're really passionate about, like going in a particular direction, because you have all these talented people who have ideas, and maybe there is a format, but a lot of these shows are over many, many, many seasons, right? So I'm guessing some people come in with maybe season 1 in mind, or maybe only episode 1 in mind, right? So like, who guides that process of keeping the show kind of aligned to a certain overarching theme?
It is the showrunner. So you work, I like to say that I work at the behest of the president. You are, what I hope that from the showrunner is that I can passionately argue the things creatively that I want, but at the end of the day, Erica it's her decision, and it is really bad to hold on to your ideas, which is, you know, a lot of writers do, and I totally get it. But once the job in TV is, when you're not the showrunner, is to sort of pitch what you want, and then the person, as you say, shaping the arc of the season, even shaping your story, because I would argue that the showrunner rewrites if you wanted to arbitrate every script in TV, the showrunner probably has had a pass on every episode. So I think that what's the dirty secret is, like, the credits in television are not, who knows, they're sort of based on the idea of money. Like, you don't, like, I'm of the written rule, like, if I rewrote your script, I would never take your name off of it, and I would never share credit, even though I could, because that is about residuals and money, and you know, back in the day, it was just like, when there were a lot of more freelances in dramatic television, because the writer's room sort of evolved out of comedy variety, and then was sort of adapted later on into dramas because there were so many episodes. But so the dirty secret is, I'm going to use you for the ideas. I may rewrite every line, and usually it's the dialogue. everybody's got their own ear for dialogue. It's lyrics. Everybody's lyrics are different. And you don't like somebody's lyrics and they're your boss and you're like, I can't. But I mean, if you're in the subordinate position, I think you just owe it to that you work at the behest of that showrunner, and then maybe when you gain experience, and then one day you're going to be the boss, and then they owe it to you to be like, help you do the show. So that showrunner is guiding everything, and probably will rewrite every episode. Some people are like that. Some people don't. Some people really don't like to do it. I think procedurals are less likely to do that. Because it's interesting. Like, I don't want to romanticize procedurals, but it is the individual. A lot of people nowadays are they're asked to do their own samples and their own voice, and so and then you're going to get hired to do when I was coming up, I should say, you didn't get a job based on your own pilot sample or what you would do on your own. It was like you'd write a Sopranos or a Star Trek, and because the idea is you need to mimic someone's voice. I don't care what your voice is, in a sense. I need to know that your story sense is what makes you unique, but you also have to mimic what's 5 years of the show, or my voice nowadays, so that you can get a feel. I know a lot of writers might feel a bait and switch, which is like, we hired you because of this great play you wrote, and then now I'm rewriting you because you're not matching my voice. So anyway, it is that showrunner who guides it, but not, and it depends on the showrunner whether they want to say, you know what, I think in the crime drama, a lot of times it is the sort of unique perspective that makes one episode different than another. Because obviously SVU, you kind of feel like it's the, dare I say, sexual assault of the week, but it's not. If you watch the show, they're very, very different. And you could probably, if you watched a lot of them, tell the difference between one writer, if you see that name a lot, and another writer. Like, oh, they do this kind of story, and this writer does this kind of story, which they all help to contribute to the longevity of the show.
Does that writer work with the director any times? Because I noticed that a lot, that credit of who directed this particular episode versus that. And I'll see a difference there, but I'd never even thought about the fact that, yes, each show itself, each episode is written differently. Will you all work with the director for that episode that you kind of were the main writer on?
That's actually part of one of the reasons for the strike. The idea is trying to get writers on set to collaborate with now the director on set, DGA controls the set, but for the most part in television, writer producers rule, have a little more, but you want that, to work with the director. And sometimes the directors and writers will, on a series, will get paired up because they kind of work well together. Your script is still only a blueprint. It is not the piece. So pairing you with a director that you have a good relationship with, that helps you, and you help them that's usually when you get some of the better episodes, when like you guys are kind of know what you're trying to get after. And that's usually over long successful shows, that's those relationships develop.
Thank you.
Okay, and I do notice, like with a lot of shows do have different directors, like almost every episode. I'm not sure if it's the case in your show, but are there like directors on staff, or are they just coming up and finding directors for each episode?
They are. There are sometimes director producers, and that's always going to be the fight between the writer and the director over dominance of the story. The problem is in episodic television, there are writers come and go, but the staff stays the same, the showrunner stays the same. So that's the part that's challenging. And I have I sympathize with the directors, because it is like if you're doing House of Cards, for instance, there's also a visual grammar that you have to maintain. So it's not like you come in and this is true of the writer. If you come and join a CSI, you can't write whatever you want. There is a grammar that needs to be followed. And that can be, and it's, I believe, even feels even more stringent visually on certain shows. Close-ups, these are the array of shots. And usually it's the cinematographer who will dictate to the director of the week, we're not going to do that shot. We don't do that. And you're like, oh, like you could be on the show like we only do handheld. Like I have this tracking. We're gonna lay down track and we're gonna do this thing, and they're like, well, we don't do that. We don't have the track. We're not even gonna try to get it for you. So like, okay. So that can be frustrating, I'm sure, for a director. So, but there is that it is almost all the episodes are different directors.
And then who chooses those directors? It's not the showrunner, is it? It's not.
It is the showrunner, but it's a
Okay.
combination of the studio, because there's some, it's a combination of the studio has people, the line producer, and the showrunner.
And do you have any of those late nights that we always hear about, where you're trying to get an episode done before it's, because you need it at a certain time and things go horribly wrong? Or any?
Yes. That my goal is to not have that happen. It depends on, writers are procrastinators. I'm someone who does not like to rewrite in production. So I try to alleviate, when do you need to change things? There are times, there are all sorts of things. I mean, things that you don't think about is there are, we talked about this the other day in the writer's room. A guy wrote an episode where there was a clue left on a Scrabble board. And there was a legal snafu because it was a CBS show and we couldn't use Scrabble. That's, you can't, we on CSI, we couldn't, like, if we were doing this on CSI, we couldn't use Zoom because it's trademarked. And so it'd be like, Baluba, like, what's that? It's like, so we can't use Google, we can't use Twitter. We did do one episode where we did use Twitter when it was first started, but then usually you can't just use regular things in the world because they're trademarked. And there's a sense that, people will feel bad if the killer uses this thing. So they had with the Scrabble, they had to rewrite, and it was the key piece of evidence was on a Scrabble board. So they had to and they got it late and it was shooting the next day. And the question is, what else could it be? And you spend all night trying to, get pages. I mean, there's stories of like The West Wing where Aaron Sorkin's writing on legal pads. You do not want that. Mainly because it's just not, but that's my experience of television. Like, is most of it is, I like to liken it to that it's an episode of Project Runway where you have these items to make a dress and you have an hour and that's it. And if you can accept that, then you will do well in television. But if you can't, like, it's very challenging because usually everything's going to go wrong. And so can you roll with that? It's never like, oh, I have this vision, I'm going to do this thing. And I'm like, so I'm always, funny that writers want to be on the set because like, it's just never going to look, it's never going to be what you imagine. It's always going to be less than. So part of that process is also the editing process. You write the script, you go, even if you're on set, when you get it back, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe we're going to watch, people are going to see this. So you usually have to write it again. And some people, they're just paralyzed by the fact that it's not what they thought it was on the page. And you've just got to accept that this is what it is. And can you make it, and again, it's not good. I don't believe in the good or bad, but I do believe that, as a genre piece, it's whether it's scary, whether the joke lands, like whether, the audience is too far ahead. I mean, there are certain things that are objective, but good or bad is, the audience will determine whether, it's successful or not. So.
It's so funny you mentioned Scrabble as something you had to do because, I mean, it's just an aside, but before I got into writing, I was a board game inventor and I got flown up to Milton Bradley and they wanted to look at some of my games. And I had a game that was like a word game that involved stealing letters. And I said, I wanted to call this Scrabotage. And they got all like, they go, well, unless your lawyer is better than our lawyer, you're not going to call it that. I'm like, whoa. Okay.
Whoa, yeah, exactly. You're like, whoa.
So,
whoa.
It just made me think of that. Sorry.
I like that name though. Scrabotage, yeah.
Dee Dee, you have another question?
Yes. That was really cool. Like inventing board games. I never even thought of that. It's like, hey, you can have a career doing this, right? And right, super cool. And that kind of ties into my question for you, Chris, and that is, I looked at your IMDb and it looks like you didn't start with like crime drama, right?
Well, some of that is actually a British comedian. So just FYI, some of that is there's some PA stuff that's not in those are just jobs in terms of the industry.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't do the comedy shows. I did not do. That is a British person of some sort. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. And it's hard to. I've never really touched my IMDb, so I'm like, I didn't, so I've sort of ignored it to some degree. But I did start off in the family. My evolution was we did The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe. It never got made, but then we got a lot of offers as in the family drama place, and we were like, we're drama writers, and so that was a mistake, though, in a way. Insofar as I would just say the mistake is whatever, and this is like actors the same way and directors, whatever it is that lands for an audience, and that audience, or whatever successful, whatever gets you the job that. And let's say people like what you did, usually they're going to hire you to do it again. So, and that's, if you're a rock band, it's, you're going to do this thing, write that song again. So it can be frustrating, though, because creatively, I can write anything, but just from a practical, just look within yourself. What do you want of this experience? Is it a way to make a living, or is it I believe that you're an artist, you just express yourself and you don't need to follow forms. But to me, I like to say I'm a craftsman. I didn't invent a table, but if you want a table, I will build you a table, and I know how a table works. I think that writing is like music theory. There are character notes and chords that tend to work well together. And that's why it's easier, and I enjoy the genre because it's clearly defined, like writing a sonnet. There's just a structure that we are always playing with, but there are rules, and we know when we're breaking them, as opposed to I'm just expressing myself. Because I do like the certain, hour long. There's a tension to that, like a pop song should only be so long in my mind. You can write a 7-minute song, but why? But that's me. Because that just makes I feel like I'm more comfortable in that world, and to know what you enjoy writing, what you want to have fun writing, because I enjoy the process of writing these mysteries. I most particularly enjoy making them, because it is like working in a restaurant, and that chaos I'm always trying to minimize, but it's almost impossible to do that.
So
but the point being, you go ahead.
I was just going to ask if people are looking for representation, because it seems like that is, of course, you can know someone, maybe you can come in as an assistant to a writer's room, but maybe you are actually writing specs or writing, something where you can say, hey, this is what I'm talented doing. When you're talking to someone who might want to represent you, are you going in saying hey, I kind of want to focus in on this particular niche? These are things that I really think I can be really passionate about writing? Or is it more hey, I can write anything, I'm a good writer, and whatever your first opportunity is, you jump into that, and that might just grow into your niche?
I would say you'd want to focus on what you want to do, and that's what you're going to sell, and how they're going to sell you. And in terms of representation, you always have to be careful to, that people can open doors for you, because anybody can be a manager, anybody, it's really how are they going? I mean, years ago, if you had an agent, you worked not because of who you were, but because of who the agent was. Now that's not true. Now they got 10 of people that they're hedging their bets, so they have 10 clients that are exactly like you. Which is a little frustrating. So it's you're always going to feel like, why am I paying this money to these people? Because they're usually, nowadays, it's I don't have an agent. In fact, after the WGA went after the agencies over packaging, I just have a manager and a lawyer. At this point in my career, it's a network of people that I know, who might, but to get in the door, you want people who have connections, who can introduce you to people, introduce your work to people. And I do think you want to focus on, what you bring to the table, what makes you unique, and also what you're going to enjoy doing. That would be my take. In television, it's hard. I still think in features, there's a world where you can write a feature script and somebody can get to somebody and it can get made. In TV, it's super challenging. I actually don't even know it doesn't seem that you should write a pilot, because there are already people who have deals. There's always so much money no one's going to buy your pilot, and it's very hard to get that pilot and sell that pilot, because you're going to have to team up with a production company first, and that's possible, but there are so many places where they've already set up deals. They're already paying money for development. Shonda Rhimes, like, so they're developing for television. You'd have to get in the door in one of those production companies because they'd be like, oh, we don't have any scripts. And it's like, well, it's like the Bridgerton would be like, oh, here's a writer who has the script and she's partnering with Shonda Rhimes' company. And you're like, oh, well, that's how that would have to work. And it's just very hard because there's a lot of, they're not looking for spec pilots because they're just people who are like myself, who already are sort of connected. So it's much more challenging. I don't want to be, a buzzkill about that, but it's just very, very, very challenging. Because even myself, like, I have a hard time with my resume selling a show. Because it is a big thing to say, we're going to hand you $100 million to make a series. So who else? Like, I've never seen in my opinion, I've never seen a pitch sell in the room. It's about who's in the room and who do we want to be in business with. So the pitch is good enough that I agree that if J.J. Abrams is sitting behind me, I'm probably going to sell it. Even Anthony Zuiker, who sold CSI, he was with Jerry Bruckheimer's company, and Jerry Bruckheimer had never produced a television show before. So here, this feature producer, mega producer, says, I want to make a show for CBS. Of course, they were going to make that show. And surprisingly enough, even though they did, they thought ABC Studios, which had was going to co-produce the pilot, backed out at the last minute because they saw the dailies and were like, this is shitty. So they left. A company from Canada that just had some money said, well, we'll finish we'll invest. Alliance Atlantis, Canadian company, invested in the rest, and the rest is history. So afterwards, ABC Studios decided they were never going to do that again, and Criminal Minds was born. They would go all the way with their next crime drama.
Okay, well, thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for
I hope
taking the time out. Now that the writer's strike's over, I'm sure you're busy, but thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See y'all. Thanks. Bye.